There we go. Everybody should be live, and we're ready for the next Game Masters workshop.
All right. My name's Paul. Who else do we have on?
So I'm Guriach here from Sweden.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, my name is GM Keegan from the Game Masters Academy.
All right. And we had one other who had to step away, but we'll introduce him when he comes back. I've been asked to have a little talk about improvisation since it's something I can't seem to shut up about. And everyone's finally called my bluff on it. How to improvise while you GM. There are a few different sides of that, I feel. There's making stuff up for your game on the spot for the players to enjoy. There's also, in a similar vein, but I feel like on the flip side, going along with with ideas that the players have. They use a lot of the same skills, but I feel they have slightly different aims. When you hear improvisation, you think you're making stuff up on the spot without any prior prep, based on some suggestion you just heard or something that's just popped into your head, and that's a good working description of it. My impression from having gamed for a while and having done stage improv is that what holds people back from being able to move forward with an improvised idea is they think they're going to be called on it. They think they're going to be told that it doesn't work, that it doesn't make sense, that it's goofy, that it's going in the wrong direction, and so they don't want to say anything and derail that. They don't want to bring up the idea that they had, and so they don't. They go along with what's happening, and hopefully something's happening. So part of the skill of improvising is being able to get past that. And if you have a group of players that you trust who are going to go along with what you say, if you have a group of players that you trust, did I say that right? They trust you and you trust them. You can say and do things that maybe if you sat down with a group at a con that you didn't know, they'd be more likely to call you on. So knowing your group is somewhat key, and so but I think rather than assuming everyone has a group of players that trust them, I'll approach it from the angle of adapting to your players first, rather than trying to get them to adapt to you. The one phrase of improv, and before I go any further, it's completely quiet on my end. Is everyone just muted? Everyone's still there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming in?
We're
okay.
Still here. Just,
all right.
They don't want to interrupt.
Yeah, thanks. The one phrase, sort of the catchphrase for improv is yes and. It crops up in the D&D 4th edition books as just that exact phrase that they claim, that they state they cop to having stolen that from improvisational theater. You'll rarely hear that exact phrase used, except kind of ironically as an eye wink, but it encapsulates the concept of accepting an idea and then building off of that idea. So the first step to improvising and what sort of gets you to practice it is not skipping over the step of wondering whether an idea is any good, and sort of assuming axiomatically that it is a good idea, because a surprising number of ideas are good and can be made to work, especially in role-playing, especially in the kinds of games that a lot of people play, which are fantasy games or science fiction games where anything really can happen. So if you start from that position of saying yes, this can work. Yes, this is working. Yes, this is happening right now, or has happened already in the backstory. You've committed to it. You've established a lot of trust with whoever came up with the idea, if it wasn't you. Though saying yes to your own idea is a good way to sort of cut yourself some slack. But I think the biggest thing is committing to it. And this is, I can't claim to be really good at improv, but it doesn't scare me. I'm willing to go in and sit down with a group I don't really know that well and say yes to their ideas, because I've done it enough times and made it work enough times that it can work. It won't work every time. On
Can
stage.
I ask a question?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you say that you discuss with your players with the yes and mentality, is this the concept of actually also designing the adventure or the campaign or what have you?
Okay.
It's sort of co-creating with the players, because I can certainly see issues with, well, for different types of games, you would not, have this type of discussion or not be completely free with what kind of stuff you would accept from your players.
I'd say it's more to do with different types of players and different types of games, but yeah, that's an aspect of it that if there's time we'll touch on. Because once you have an improv sort of mindset going for yourself and for the players at the table, it becomes a lot easier to collaborate. But it doesn't have to reach that level for you to consider yourself improvising. And I think anybody who GMs already improvises a lot and does a lot of even if they're working from a module, they are doing sort of a hybrid approach where sometimes they are making stuff up. I think it's kind of gotten a bad rap. I think the original idea early on was to make up a lot more stuff and just trust your DM that he wasn't going to mess up the game, that the game was going to be fun for you. And I can see why that changed, if it did, to more what we have now, where the rules are much more codified and you have more of them, and you're expected to, when you sit down with a group you haven't met, stick with those rules rather than go off and make stuff up. I understand that. So this is, but there's always going to be a little bit, because the rules can't cover everything in every situation, and players, almost by definition, are going to go off those rules.
So I guess what I was really wondering then, because you said you were sitting down with your players and you taking their ideas and going with the yes and.
Yeah.
I mean, what I was wondering is, do you do this also for pre-made or your own designed adventure or a module as well before the game starts or something like that, or are we talking more generally during the game here?
Both. I think it's both. But the point I was trying to make is it can work at sort of any level. You can go whole hog and prepare nothing up front, or you can have something very well prepared, a lot of detail, a lot of prep, and still incorporate player ideas as they go. It can all happen even before the game, where you're talking with the players, brainstorming and coming up with stuff like that, or it can happen right in the moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. No, I think I'm along for the ride. I just wondering if you had any particular thing before the game. Okay.
Yeah, I think the principles stay the same, and I think it scales pretty well. It always comes back to accepting an idea and adding on to it. Another way to think of adding on to it is justifying it. The reason when a lot of times when people think improv, they think comedy, and part of the reason for that is that outside of a fantasy setting where things can just pop out of nowhere and things can change, in an instant, justifying certain things can only be done in a funny way, and it makes the audience laugh.
Not
point being that-
necessarily. I'm not sure.
No, right? Not necessarily. It's not necessarily funny, but you can tell it's not serious. It's not realistic. And I want to. Yeah. Did you have something?
No, I'm just. You will probably come upon this, but I mean, I guess this comes a little bit back to the discussion of buy-in, I guess, because even if people wildly improvise, they does not have to be funny or out of the blue, as long as people are just agreeing on the setting, right, or the limitations within which they can improvise.
That's right. So let's see. Justification of ideas. On the GM side, working with player input, not necessarily like player ideas that come up with in a discussion, but just the players stating that they want to try something, they want to know if they can do something, they want to know if something is true. The first step, of course, is to say yes. If you're trying to improvise, if you don't want to arrive at the answer some other way by looking at a book, maybe, or holding that question for later when it can be worked out. If you want to improvise, you say yes to the idea. Then comes sort of the meat of it, the justification of the idea, and we can get into examples in a minute. I just wanted to go over sort of the basics. That, of course, is the really hard part, and I think the thing that makes people that brings people up short, and to say, I don't want to say yes to anything my players do because things can get crazy. It goes against what's already established. It confuses things, and those are risks. Like I say, it doesn't always work, but you get better at it. So one trick that improvisers use, and the more I learn, the more I see this trick in other places like TV shows and movies and books, things where there is a major plot that they're trying to stretch out of a long period of time and keep coherent. The trick is to leave out a lot of the details. In an improv stage show, there are no details. There's nothing that anyone has as sort of a backstory that they can point to and say that detail that person just made up doesn't work. It contradicts something else. Therefore, they're clearly improvising, lying. I don't believe this anymore. My suspension of disbelief is gone. And TV shows and movies run into this. Star Trek, long-running TV shows have people pointing out, that can't be because of this pre-established fact. You also have this in game worlds. Forgotten Realms, Dark Sun, they all have these huge books, volumes, novels, things like that have established facts that a lot of players will have read, and they come to the table knowing that, I see the comment that the main complaint against Yes And is keeping that consistency. So one way to deal with that is to not establish stuff up front. I'm just saying that's one way to do it. The way it works in improv is unless you've said it, this is like stage improv, unless someone has said it, announced it, declared it and made it clear it's not a real thing, and anyone can change it and establish that thing. For instance, the common thing is what are two people's relationships, and until someone says, "Hey, mom," or "Look, bro," or "Hey, boss," something like that, those relationships are in flux. One improviser states it. Now they're not in flux anymore. Now they're established. Now the joke might be if they make a mistake and lose that consistency. Prior to the establishment of the detail, you don't have that fact to be contradicted. Maybe someone was thinking they were somebody else, or that it was a different relationship. But the moment that's said, for the GM in an improv mindset, and I'm not even getting into the players yet, for the GM in that mindset, that's true. This can happen when players meet an NPC, for instance. They might, I think typically you'd have them ask, "Can I know this person?" The common approach might be, well, okay, say I'll throw it out to you guys. I'll throw it out to Griach. Am I saying your name right? Griach?
Yes.
Okay. You DM, I assume?
Oh yeah, yes.
Okay. Say you're running a scene, you have an NPC talking to the players, and one of the players asks, "Do I know this person?" What would your typical response be to that?
Well,
not to put you on the spot.
yes,
You can.
no, it's fine. No, it's fine. It depends a little bit on what type of scenario I'm running. Because if I have pre-made characters, for example, with lots of details and background and stuff, then that's actually a valid question. But in the light of of this workshop, with loser, or if there was a made-up NPC on the spot, say, then it would make sense, I would think, to have maybe ask the player, "What do you think?" Right?
Okay.
Quick chime in.
Sorry.
I'm trying to raise my hand in text.
Oh, yeah. I've got sort of a problem here because my my G+ windows are covering up the bottom of the chat window, so
I see.
I can't see the latest thing that came up.
One of our technical difficulties, folks. We apologize.
I'm going to switch over to the workshop. There it is. Okay. Yes, Keegan. What did you want to say?
Before all those technical glitches, I almost lost what I was thinking. One thing that we've used in our games is usually when somebody asks a question, they like taking it because they have an idea, and so typically if it's not going to derail the entire situation scene for the rest of the group, we usually come up with how do you, use an example, how do you know this person, or can I know this person? Then we come up with sure, how do you know this person, and describe it, as long as it's not going to be a game breaker for the rest of the group and kind of disrupt the group. It usually isn't, obviously, because people like to be cooperative, and we kind of just let it roll, sure, how does your character know it? And then they give a little story, and then everybody else sometimes chimes in, will add their own take of how they know them, or we now have a reaction to it, and it really builds up the NPC now in the character or in the rest of the players' minds.
Yeah, great. That was almost exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, took your thunder. I apologize.
That's okay. And Gretch, I think you illustrated sort of what I was going to say as well. That it depends. Typically, it depends on the game whether or not you can say yes to that. The GM might look at their notes. They might look at the module, and what I've seen, my history with this is the GM plays on the safe side and says, "Oh no, you don't know this person," because as soon as you say yes to that, you kind of don't know what you're getting into. You don't know how that will change the adventure. You don't know what advantage that might give the players, or things along those lines.
I can agree with you there that it does add an extra element, which might be unpredictable, but it depends again on.
It does depend.
Yeah.
So the if you were going to try to improvise this situation, the player says, "Do I know this character?" Or sometimes might not even ask. They might assume based on what they wrote about their backstory. Like your NPC is a guard, and your player in their backstory somewhere that maybe you didn't even read said a former member of the King's Guard. You know, I think I've definitely been in situations where the player says, "No, it makes sense that I would know this person," and I end up in a tight spot where I'm like, "Well, I didn't plan on you knowing them, but you're right, it does make sense." I unfortunately have been in the position where I would make up a reason why they don't. This guy was new hired, or you just never crossed paths, or something like that.
Yeah, that happens.
I play with people who see right through that and are not happy because you either, you've in the best case in the very best case you've taken their idea and done nothing with it. Their idea is still true, but it's not very useful, and nothing comes of it. And what I typically see is they keep trying to weasel stuff in, keep trying to make that fact that they established work until usually I just give up. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. You don't know this guy, but obviously you would know the captain of the guards. Yeah, okay, right. And I end up having to do it anyway, which is, to be honest, how I got to this attitude of I'm just going to say yes anyway because I'm just going to lose.
It does make sense. I mean, one could. On the other hand, if one knows that the players are, I mean, it's also a sign of a interested and active player trying to find.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a reward for the players.
Exactly, and that is very, very valuable to have them that engaged. I think we'd all agree that we want our players interested in what's going on, and
that's my biggest reward.
Yeah, the improv term is to block. Anytime you say no, or that's not it, or the thing you just said can't work because that falls under the overall heading of block. If it's for in-game reasons, if someone's saying something racist and you're like, "Whoa, shut up," that's more an out-of-game thing. But if it's plot related, if it's scene related, to take an idea that someone is establishing and say, "No, it can't be for this reason." Best case, you're just taking up game time explaining something, which we all do to some extent, but I find can get you out of the game and get you explaining stuff and arguing about stuff. Worst case, it's really shut them down, and they're going to be less creative next time because it hasn't gotten them anywhere. So
actually, sorry if I'm interrupting. No, I'm just pondering in the example of the I should know this guard or I should know. I would actually, if it was really not in my plans for them to know the guard for some reason the players don't know, I might actually consider working in instead saying no, that you don't know this guard, but you think you might know his or her sister or something like that, which doesn't actually give the player a win against you, advantage. But advantage in a sense, but still introduces a new thing, a new concept. You can talk to the guard against, maybe give him some bonuses or whatever. But it's still not introducing a full "I know you" kind of thing.
You may have seen me mention on the forums. Your responses can be no, yes, but, and yes and. And no, I think, has clear issues. Yes doesn't really have issues. It has issues. They're not very clear. You said yes. What more do you want? Well, you've done good, but you can do better. Yes, but is a very defensive yes and that I try to avoid because it can easily turn into a block, which sometimes you may feel you need. Surprisingly rarely do you need it. For other reasons I hope we have time to get into. Malcolm has a question.
Yeah, I do. I usually do 3 question marks to make sure that everybody's... Sorry about my previous, but I just wanted to ask about, couldn't he rephrase that yes but that he had used to yes and through? Like, yes, you remember him, and to some extent, I would ask you to roll to see where you remember him from.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they roll successfully, it's like, yes, you actually do know them. Well, you know of them. You've never really met them personally, but you do know their sister.
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't it just about phrasing in regards to the yes and the yes but? You can easily turn a yes but into yes and.
What if
I've seen.
What if they fail the roll?
What if he fails the rolls? Yes, you do believe you've met him before, or you've seen him somewhere before, but you just can't put your finger on where it is.
Okay. It can be rephrased. I find it very risky, especially if the player was asking specifically if they know the person or stated for whatever reason in their backstory, I would know this person, because that is what makes sense to them. That's what they're engaged with, and to hold back from that, I think, is not as bad as saying no, but it's becomes sort of conditional, and what I see resulting from that is people then hedging their own ideas before they bring them up. Not saying, do I know this guy? It then becomes, could I have known of him, maybe his sister, something like that, trying to get something that they don't have to roll for, that won't be questioned and won't seem like they're trying to get advantage, that they've now learned that the DM will kind of moderate. Does that make sense?
I guess, but in regards to the contacts, like having already known them, that wasn't what I was trying to answer. If they had already known them, and it said in their contact sheet, I assume the GM would have had buy-in in regards to the contacts you generally claim to have known, and if not, you would have rolled maybe something like knowledge local to confirm if you've met people before. I mean, that's the way I would have done it personally, but I don't.
Yeah.
But I think this was.
See what you're saying.
I think in this case, this was more a situation of the GM not having planned any knowledge at all, and the player basically on their own coming up with a cool possible contact which they could use for something.
Yeah. Ideally, you would read the player would have that backstory, and you would read it and get the same things out of it and realize the impact on your story ahead of time, and play that scene from the beginning as you know who this guy is. I've seen that happen a lot. The guard comes up, the GM realizes, oh, you were in the guard, so you know this guy, and follow on from there. I've also seen it as a player realizing something mid situation or bringing it up right then, something the DM didn't realize could be true, and claiming now that it should be true. And how does the DM deal with that? So there is stuff that can be seen ahead of time. I think in any game there's a potential that you're going to come up with stuff, or the players are going to come up with stuff that you couldn't have foreseen. And that's hopefully what I can offer some advice on. Does that?
It is an interesting question, actually. How one would say the player is interacting with the guard or something, and acting and the GM is acting like they don't know each other, and then midway through, the player sort of realizes, "Wow, hold on,
Okay.
do you retcon that, or do you rather come up with some ad hoc solution to explain the consistency?"
Okay, you use the word that I was just going to use, the consistency, keeping that consistency. Let me hold that thought for just a second. If your player comes up with some piece of information that you hadn't considered, such as, in this example, I know this NPC, and you want to improvise it, you'd say yes first, and then try to work with the fact that you just sort of thrown your hat over the fence, and now you have to justify it. So I guess that does lead right into your question about consistency. That is okay. The two main things are the consistency sort of what just happened, of what has already been established. You introduced yourself to this guy, you treated him as though you didn't know him, and now you're saying you do know him. That's confusing. Let's just, the instinct might be to say, let's just go with what we established. No, you don't know him. Because that's more consistent with what just happened, I feel, or somebody feels. The other part of the consistency that I was sort of getting into before is the GM has written in the notes that facts about the NPC that preclude anyone knowing him. Maybe he's the villain. Maybe he's an illusion or some other thing going on where if the players simply, according to these notes, it would be impossible for them to know this character. That's sort of the path I was going down before, where if the players, if something hasn't been established and made clear to the players, it can be mutable, in the sense that it can be changeable. Wow, I didn't really plan for them to know this guy. He's actually a homunculus that is in the service of somebody else. But
yeah, just throw that out.
Yeah, but I didn't. You don't necessarily say that, but the improvisation comes with, yes, you do know him. Crap. Now, what do I do to make this work in my story? I'm going to put a hold on that for a second to go back to the question of consistency that's come up a couple times now that I want to address, because that is a major block, especially the longer a game runs and the more details are in the setting or in the module. Talking about established facts now, how do you keep that consistent? And there's no really good set rule for that. Like I said, one of the main things is to avoid establishing a great deal of stuff. You can't do that if it's been running for a long time. Of course, you just naturally are going to establish where people are from and who knows who, and some history about the characters. And I think Keegan said he would turn it back on the players, and that is one approach. You know this guy, you think you would know him. Why do you think you would know him? That's if there's no, if that's useful in the case when the GM really has no stake in whether the characters know the NPC or not. It's like, it's a throwaway guy. Sure, you know him. If the issue is we've been talking like strangers for 5 minutes and now you realize you know him, the question of whether you would retcon that or explain it. Just yesterday I was in a class with someone who I recognized, thought I'd seen before but couldn't think of where. And I could easily have been talking to that guy for a long time before I said, do I know you from someplace? And it becomes a matter of what's plausible. Hold on, I'm getting some messages here. True, you should know them, but you don't. Now that is interesting, isn't it? Okay.
That's what I would do actually myself.
Okay. All right. Did everyone see Grouch's note in the?
Yeah, looked interesting.
Yeah, that's a good thought as well. So I'll touch on that in a moment.
I found when doing that, players suddenly get in thinking that there's a lot more intrigue going on than there actually.
Yeah, right. More, and they're going to bring up more suggestions and probably have to require you to think on your feet a little more. So it becomes if you're a lot of times I feel consistency hinges on plausibility rather than raw logic. Like, is it plausible that I could be talking to this person and not know them and suddenly realize I do know them? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. That starts to get into the realm of buy-in with the players. You might have someone saying you've been talking to him for 5 minutes. No, you don't know him. That's you shouldn't even ask. Or you'll have other players who are like, who reach that same conclusion that maybe you just didn't recognize him. He's got a full beard now, and you have a scar, and that's why you didn't notice each other. So it can be. It can't always. I won't say it can always be justified, but once you've said yes to an idea, especially if you are able to involve the other players and get sort of everyone's brain working in parallel, I've seen a remarkable number of things explainable by people who want it to be explained. That's sort of the key to buy-in, is they want it to work. So you can rectify it or justify it. I mean, I don't think it's an inexcusable sin to retcon it. Some people find that takes them out of the game to say, okay, that whole conversation actually just occurred over beers instead of out front in the guard station. That I think you'd have to gauge your players and see how they felt about that. You'll definitely have one player on your side because it was their idea, and to say yes to that and go along with that is a massive amount of trust. It says my connection to the server has been interrupted. Is anyone else getting that?
No.
I can still hear you.
I think so.
Okay, I just got a flood of messages, which I think might have.
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, what are you trying to say? I feel like what you're going back to collaborative gameplay in the sense that by allowing the plausibility of the players to suggest things, and as long as they have a legitimately reasonable sounding excuse as to why they know these things, it's generally okay to roll with it because they've now created this part of the story, and you don't really have to. Like, the best way to say yes is to make sure that the players justify why you're saying yes. Am I right?
I think that's one way to do it, and it's the way I prefer. But it doesn't have to. I want to be careful here. It doesn't have to be collaborative in the sense that you're actively working together, and that the players know that. But it works out to being collaborative in the sense that they're giving ideas and you're incorporating them.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. If they commit to something that you don't have planned down, if they are able to reason through how they've come to this conclusion, and if it generally makes sense with what's going on, and you don't really, and there's nothing really that you have against it, and there's no reason to particularly retcon it once they've given a good reason, you can just write that in somehow. Because, like you said, because without buy-in, you really can't. Without that level of buy-in to the point where where everybody's clear on the plot and clear on the adventure, you kind of have to be able to commit to some level of plausibility at the very least.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing that you were saying about They have to, if they can reasonably justify it, and you don't have any particular objections to it. That's sort of the yes half of yes and. Not only when you say yes, you're saying that you're on their side for whatever this cause is, this fact. You agree with them that it is true, and so now you're sort of on the hook to make it work as well. So yes, since it's their idea, they should have some advice on how it works. Otherwise, why did this occur to them? It could be that they're just looking for an advantage, like, boy, it would be helpful if we knew this guard or this NPC, or knew that trolls are vulnerable to fire or something like that. So that's certainly possible. But once you've said yes, whether or not you really want it to be true, you've sort of committed to making it true. You've lowered the bar for yourself, ideally, on what it takes to justify that fact. Because if you make it too difficult for yourself and keep saying, no, that doesn't work, no, that idea doesn't work, no, you can't do that, you're just making it too hard on yourself. You're defeating your own yes by continually saying no to the things that make sense for you to have said yes. That was a confusing way to put that. Does that make sense?
Not really. I got the first part where you said yes, and how you pretty much defined the point of yes, but then I'm not saying that I'd be saying no to other things that would be similarly sensible. I'm just saying, as long as the players can justify it reasonably, the yes is the part where I can understand. I've just always had problems with the and, like how do you add on that, which I feel like is a good way to branch into the second part of this.
I agree.
Quickly.
What if you justified it? What if the players didn't have to justify it at all? What if it was all on you to justify it? Just bear with me for a second. What if you had the job of justifying the thing that they said was true?
Oh, okay, I see where you're going. Okay.
So that's just because rather than just and.
Okay, so that allows you to influence the story as well, right?
Well, yeah, and that I think we would agree is typically the GM's position. So go with that. Say it's not even their idea. Say you came up with you introduced this NPC and you said, I think you would know this guy. You are going to then want to justify your idea, right?
You picked on him in high school.
yeah, something like that. You could. I think any of us. I think we're all creative people, and I think any of us could come up with a myriad of reasons why it's plausible that a PC knows this character. So part of, and I'm getting some echo here. Does someone have a speaker going?
Did you just reload the game? You might need to turn off everybody else's speaker.
Okay. Yeah, why don't I just disable all that?
Like just in Roll20.
Yep. Okay. Okay. I'm still here, but I'll power through. What I'm getting hung up on is the phrasing, if they can justify their idea. And what I hope comes out of saying yes, as what I hope happens when I'm on stage with with someone when they've said yes to my idea, that they want it to work as much as I do. So if I'm suddenly at a loss and I can't justify the thing that just happened, I've got another person to rely on to help me come up with a way to justify it. And that, I think, can be the GM's role in that situation, when they've just said yes to an idea, especially if players aren't in a place where they feel comfortable establishing things about the world. You wouldn't. I wouldn't expect any average player to say, yes, he and I were in the war together. Well, whoa, that player just established there was a war. Who was the war against? What were the stakes? What happened? That's massive.
And that's where you'd retcon it at that point, or
no. Bear with me just a second.
Okay.
The player says, "I know this person." Forget the reason why they think they know the person, because that does put a lot of burden on them, and asking them to justify it can turn into a block if they went in without a really good idea, or an idea that meets the standards, the GM standards or the standards at the table. It works out to the equivalent of no, you don't know them because you can't justify it. Now, if the GM, who typically has the power to establish wide-ranging facts about the world, we generally cede the GM that power. So assuming you're not giving the players any other collaborative power or narrative control, when the GM says yes to that idea and is on the hook to explain why that's true and justify it, the GM can establish anything. You were in the war together, you bunked together, you know his sister, something along those lines. So that can be applied even if the player does have an idea and does have a rationale. It becomes not them having to justify their idea, but the two of you at least, and possibly other people at the table justifying the idea. And for the GM, justifying the idea might not amount to anything more than, yeah, that sounds good. But it's, I find, useful to set that bar pretty low, because the reason we set the bar for justification high is because we want that consistency and we want that realism. You already have one person who thinks it's real. You don't have to convince them that it's true. It's the other people at the table maybe and yourself that you have to convince is true. But if you take it as read, if you say that yes, it is true, you're halfway there, really. Hold on. I'll let you digest that while I read some messages that are coming through here.
I'd like
a question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Malcolm.
All right, yeah, I just wanted to have one more follow-up question to that, because it makes sense what you're trying to get across. I've never really understood yes and.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought that if we're going to do collaborative gaming, the player needs to justify their point, but actually if you can justify it, that actually helps a lot more with the GM's understanding of the world. Like, you can say yes, and this is, like, you create the justification is how yes and works. Am I correct?
Justification has to exist. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. It can come from the player, it can come from the GM, it can come from another player.
Very good point.
I've been in situations where I'm like, yeah, that's true, but I'm not sure how that would work, and somebody just pipes up and makes something up or refers to something that I'd forgotten about.
That happens now and then, certainly.
Yeah,
That's
that
always
gets
helpful.
dangerously close to the collaborative side that I know makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but most groups I've seen, people are popping off stuff all the time and just saying stuff, and gamers are generally pretty creative people if they have the if they're in an environment where they can feel like their idea isn't going to be blocked or called stupid or anything like that. Not that you guys would do that, but that if you free up that flow of that transfer of information, where ideas are more likely to be accepted, and people see that other people will come to their aid when they need something explained, even if that's just the GM. And in fact, the GM, I think, is the person most in the position to build that trust of, yes, your ideas will be worked with and not blocked. Then you get more ideas coming in from the players. Has been what I've found. Does that? Hold on. Griat raised his hand, but Keegan had a question too, I think.
No, well, that kind of answers my question.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure. Okay.
Pipe down for now.
No, Grinch, you're up.
Griat. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I just want to comment that I like that sort of establishment of this yes and concept, because I've also felt that outside something like Fiasco, Yes and
Good
becomes it's a very good game, but that's really suitable for Yes and. But apart from that, in a more traditional role-playing setting, it can be a bit too free if you are the GM. But I like the concept you say here that you let the GM actually manage the establishment. I also want to add another aspect, which is also good to have, I guess, or to be aware of, or another tool, I would say, and that's simply to flat out apologize and say, I messed this up, I missed this one, simply just please ignore this at the moment.
Missed what exactly?
Whatever. I mean, you the GM occasionally, as a GM, hopefully not that often, but occasionally you do make a mistake, and it's something which is important for the adventure, but you just forgot about it and messed up. So that's at that point, I find that players actually like or more appreciates the players GM simply apologizing and just let's go on with it, and rather than trying to fudge it or try to fake or come up with something half-assed. Actually,
that's a fascinating position to be in, and it's risky if you're with a lot of people who had a really high standard for the game and were like, this guy didn't do his homework or whatever. But you can be with, GM's not perfect. What?
Yeah.
A lot of times I've been in. That's happened to me more than once. I've been like, oh, crap, that guy was supposed to live, or shoot, I totally forgot to give you guys this fact. The players won't let me apologize for it. They'll be like, no, it's okay.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Why? Why is that okay? How does that work? No, it's because, I would know it because of this. Like, great. Hey, fine. You saved my bacon. I'm not going to ask you to justify that because it saved me.
Right.
So that's another way to look at yes and. You just put your bacon in the fire, and if no one can justify it, it's you look dumb for saying yes. So it lowers the bar on the justification significantly, at least for the GM.
But I think it also, at least knowing or be accepting the fact that I mean, it shouldn't happen often, of course, but that you are allowed to apologize and just be human. I think that's important bit also in your interaction with your players.
I agree.
Yeah, that you're not this sort of evil enemy.
Yeah, I think that's a big trust builder as well.
Yeah.
I had something I was going to say though. Any questions while I think of what that might have been? It does veer very quickly into full-on collaboration, which is I went from one year I was in a game where has it been an hour already? Shoot. Well. One quick little story about how I got here. I was in a game with an Eberron game, a 3.5, with a younger kid. Most of us were in 20s and 30s, and this guy was maybe 16. And he kept coming up with stuff. The classic stuff that just drives DMs crazy. I want to buy poison. Like, oh, come on. And the other players were with me. They were like, no, stick with us. I want to make a harpoon gun. No, come on, you have to roll craft checks and just take forever. Come on. I want to ride on top of the elemental cart. No. Just over and over again. No, stop it. Be quiet. And finally, we did get him to kind of shut up and be quiet. And I hate myself for that. Here's this kid. No way he'd been playing D&D for more than 5 years, and he's in this group of guys that hopefully he kind of looked up to, telling him, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, no, don't do this. And someone actually said to me, I think I was complaining about it on a forum. Someone actually said to me, what if you let him do it? And I was like, well, yeah, that would have been pretty cool to be wandering the streets of Goblin City looking for poison. That would be a pretty awesome scene. It was, but that's not the scene of the module, so we're not going to do that. But yeah, wow, that would be really cool. I wish we could have done that. Or make a harpoon gun. It gets harder. There is some stuff that's really hard, and you can't avoid having to go to the players or somebody for advice on how to make it work. But establishing that you're a GM and that you're running a table where people can come up with ideas, and that blocking them and blocking your own ideas and blocking anyone else's ideas is sort of de rigueur, really opens things up and really starts to, I've found, give the game more of a flow, give you more things that you can accomplish, because people want to see them work instead of worrying as much about how to make them work within the rules in such a way that they're unassailably consistent and true and by the rules. Given that it's an hour, I could talk about this for another 3 hours, but I want to. I think the stipulated time for the workshop is about an hour, and so I don't want to force it to go over. I want to hear what people think about that.
So I think my main sort of draw from this is, which I really liked, is this, as I said before, this elaboration on the yes and argument for a more restricted collaboration or cooperative,
limited,
storytelling. Yeah, because and that's probably when looking back, it's probably what I have been doing, although not actually mentioning it quite like that. But I like the whole idea of saying yes and is actually very challenging and a bit scary.
It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, I'm gone.
Are you sure you're done?
Let me just say that
I'm not done, but go on.
I've gotten the flag from Keegan that we should wrap it up in about 2 minutes. So, but that gives
I would
us
just
time to think.
I would just like to recommend people to really try Fiasco, actually, for training this.
I agree. So Malcolm?
I just wanted to ask about the not ask about it. I just want to say thank you for pointing out yes and. I've always been doing yes, but, which I know is a defensive yes. But I like how you're allowed to come up, the GM should be allowed to come up with a justification through yes and I feel like that would benefit my ability to say yes to games more often if I can actually come up with the scenario of what situation I'm agreeing to yes with. Because I feel like it's not necessarily about control, but it's about, making sure that the characters don't go too crazy with what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really the best way to put it.
No, that totally makes sense, and that is what makes it hard, especially initially, especially if you're transitioning from a game where it's important to get advantage. And this was me when I first went to yes and people were popping off all sorts of stuff and sort of winning everything, and I had to slow them down, and I said, you can win whatever you want, but why don't we skip to something that you're interested in having some challenge about. If you're just going to, essentially I was saying, if you're going to use this freedom just to win, that's fine, but we're not really playing the game anymore. The goal should be to use this ability, this freedom, to keep playing the game, but do it in an interesting way for you. Essentially getting the players to say yes to the game, and here's what makes the game interesting to me. It makes the game interesting if my bard knows everyone. Well, you can still make it challenging in that event, but you want to kind of know that up front, and you want to get to the part where now the bard is challenged. and so is the rest of the party in a fun way. So the point being that if you're saying yes, that's a great first step, and that's, like I said, at least half of it, possibly more than half of it, just to say yes to what they want, and then figure out either by yourself or with them a way to give them what it is they want, keeping in mind that ultimately what everyone wants probably is a challenging adventure. So how you arrive at that could be it's a workshop all unto itself. So maybe we'll do that next time. But that's what I have for now.
All right. We really want to thank Paul for taking on this task of throwing himself out there, putting himself out there.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Helping us with the Game Master's Workshop for Improvisation. And we'll just go down the list. This is GM Keegan from the GMA, and then we have
Paul, also from the GMA. I think we all are.
Yeah, Malcolm from the GMA.
And Griach as well.
Griach, do you go by a different name on the forum?
No, it's the same.
Oh, I have to say I hadn't noticed or seen your name. Apologies for that, but maybe I'll keep I'll definitely keep a lookout for it now.
Yeah, also, Paul, do you use Skype? Because I tend to use that more often, and I'd appreciate it if I knew somebody on there who was able to. I could chat with about these kind of things. Because I like the idea. I don't know if I'm going to have,
Yeah.
After the broadcast, we'll take care of that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know. I thought you were finished.
Fair enough.
I didn't know.
Okay.
And thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time on the GM Workshops.